Victoria Hale slammed her phone against the desk so hard the screen cracked. "You!" She pointed straight at the mechanic kneeling by the landing gear, grease dripping from his knuckles. "You think you know planes? Fly this jet, then we'll talk." The entire crew laughed, every single one of them. But the mechanic didn't blink. He stood up, wiped his hands on his jumpsuit, and walked toward the cockpit stairs without saying a word. What nobody in that hangar knew was that this man once touched the edge of space and carried a ghost that grounded him for 10 years. But today, the sky was calling him back. Drop a comment with the city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. And, if you haven't already, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss what happens next. Caleb Reed's knuckles were bleeding again. He didn't notice right away. He was elbow deep inside the nose gear housing of a Gulfstream G700, fighting a stubborn hydraulic fitting that had been leaking since Tuesday. The wrench slipped, and his skin caught the edge of a bracket. Blood smeared across the metal, mixing with the black grease already caked on his hands. He pulled his fist out, looked at it, and shook it off. 44 years old. 22 of those years spent around aircraft. The first 12 in a cockpit. The last 10 underneath one. That was the deal he made with himself. That was the price. His shift started at 5 in the morning, every morning. He liked it that way. The hangar was quiet before 6. No executives strutting around in Italian shoes. No pilots tossing their bags at him like he was a bellhop. Just him, the planes, and the low hum of fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. By 6:15, the school bus would roll past the main gate. Caleb always found a reason to be near the fence at that exact time. He'd see the yellow flash through the chain link, and sometimes, if Owen had the window seat, he'd catch a small hand waving. That wave was worth more than anything the sky ever gave him. "Reed, you done with that G7 yet?" That was Frank Maddox, shift supervisor, a decent man who talked too loud and drank too much coffee. Caleb respected him because Frank never asked questions about the past. 15 minutes, Caleb called back. "Make it 10. We got a full house today. Hale's got some kind of emergency meeting in D.C., and she's breathing fire." Caleb didn't respond to that. He knew who Victoria Hale was. Everybody at Meridian Airfield knew who she was. CEO of Hale Dynamics, one of the largest private aviation firms on the East Coast. She had a fleet of 12 jets, a government contract worth $400 million, and a reputation for destroying anyone who got in her way. Caleb had seen her exactly 6 times in 3 years. Each time, she walked through the hangar like she owned the air itself. She never once looked at him. Not once. He was invisible. Just another grease stain on the floor. That was fine with him. He finished the hydraulic fitting in 8 minutes, wiped his hands on a rag that was dirtier than his hands, and walked toward the break room. His thermos was sitting on the table where he left it. Black coffee, no sugar. He poured a cup and leaned against the wall. His phone buzzed. A text from Owen. Just one word. "Dad." Then a photo. Owen at school, holding up a paper airplane he'd made in class. Big grin, missing one tooth on the bottom left. Caleb stared at that photo longer than any man should stare at a paper airplane. But it wasn't the airplane he was looking at. It was the grin. That grin was everything. That grin was the reason he crawled under jets for $11 an hour instead of flying them. He typed back, "That's a clean build, kid. We'll test it tonight." Owen replied with 3 rocket emojis. Caleb slipped the phone into his pocket and took a long sip of coffee. The day was already hot, and it wasn't even 7 yet. He could feel the humidity pressing against the hangar doors like a living thing. Then the shouting started. It came from the main hangar bay. Not the casual yelling of mechanics working over engine noise. This was different. This was panic. Caleb set his coffee down and walked toward the sound. He saw the crowd first. A dozen people clustered near the tail of a Bombardier Global 8000. Pilots, crew members, 2 women in ground ops vests, and Frank, who was on his radio looking like he'd just swallowed a wasp. "What happened?" Caleb asked a fueler standing at the edge of the group. "Captain Briggs collapsed, right there on the tarmac. Paramedics already took him. They think it's his heart." Caleb felt that in his chest. Not because he knew Briggs well. He didn't. But he knew what it meant to lose a pilot without warning. He knew that feeling better than anyone here. "Who's the backup?" Caleb asked. The fueler shrugged. "Some kid, Torres. He's been flying citations for maybe a year. No way he's rated for the Global." Caleb nodded slowly. A Bombardier Global 8000 was not a toy. It was one of the longest-range business jets in the world. Fly it wrong, and you'd find out fast how little the sky forgives. He turned to walk back to his work when a black SUV screeched to a halt just outside the hangar doors. The driver barely had time to open the rear door before Victoria Hale stepped out. She moved fast, heels clicking on concrete like gunshots. Her phone was pressed to her ear, and her voice was a blade cutting through the noise. "I don't care what the medical team says. I need a pilot, now. Not in an hour, not after lunch, now." She ended the call and turned to Frank. "Where's my aircraft?" Frank straightened up like a soldier. "Ma'am, the Global is prepped and fueled, but Captain Briggs is—" "I know about Briggs. Where's the replacement?" Frank hesitated. "We have First Officer Torres. He's rated on the citation series, but he doesn't have type certification for the Global." Victoria stared at Frank like he had just spoken in a foreign language. "Then get someone who does. Ma'am, on this short notice, with the current crew rotation, there's nobody in-house who's rated. We've reached out to Pacific Charter, and Pacific Charter takes 3 hours to mobilize. I don't have 3 hours. I have 45 minutes." Her voice was climbing. Not hysterical, controlled. But the kind of control that sits 1 inch from explosion. She turned to the group. "Is there anyone in this building who can fly a Global 8000? Silence. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The mechanics looked at their boots. The ops crew looked at Frank. Frank looked at the floor. Caleb stood at the back, half hidden behind a tool cart. He watched it unfold with the same calm he brought to everything. His hands were still. His breathing was steady. But inside, something moved. Something old. Victoria scanned the room like a hawk searching for movement. Her eyes passed over the crew, the fuelers, the maintenance staff. Then they stopped. On Caleb. She didn't know his name. She didn't know anything about him. All she saw was a man in a torn jumpsuit with grease on his face and blood on his knuckles, standing where no one important should be standing. "You," she said. Caleb didn't move. "You, the mechanic. What are you staring at?" "Nothing, ma'am." "Then stop standing there like you have somewhere better to be, unless you can fly this jet." She said it the way people say things they don't mean. The way a frustrated person throws words at the nearest target just to feel the satisfaction of watching them land. A few crew members chuckled. One of the pilots, a man named Garrett, actually laughed out loud. "Good one, Miss Hale." Victoria didn't smile. She was too angry to smile. But she let the moment sit, let the mockery hang in the air like exhaust fumes. "Well," she said, looking directly at Caleb, "fly this jet. Then we'll talk." The hangar went quiet. Not the quiet of an empty room. The quiet of people holding their breath, waiting for the embarrassment to end so they could go back to work. Caleb looked at her. He didn't blink. He didn't shift his weight. He didn't swallow hard or look away or do any of the things a nervous man does when power stares him down. He just looked at her. And then he set his rag down on the tool cart, slowly, like a man folding a flag. "Okay," he said. The word dropped into the silence like a stone into water. Victoria blinked. "Excuse me?" "I said, okay. I'll fly it." Garrett stopped laughing. Frank's mouth fell open. The two ops women looked at each other with wide eyes. Victoria tilted her head. "You're serious?"
"I don't joke about aircraft, ma'am."
"You're a mechanic?"
"Yes, ma'am."
"And you're telling me you can fly a Bombardier Global 8000?
"I'm telling you, I can get you to DC on time."
Victoria took a step closer. She was used to intimidation. She'd built an empire on it. She could make board members sweat with a glance. But Caleb didn't sweat. He stood there like a man who had faced things far more terrifying than a CEO in a bad mood. "What's your name?" she asked. "Caleb Reed." "And where exactly did you learn to fly, Caleb Reed? Community college?" More chuckles from the crew. Garrett was practically grinning. Caleb didn't take the bait. "I'm type-rated on the Global series. Also the G7, the Falcon 900, and the C-17 Globemaster. If you want the full list, it'll take a minute." The chuckling stopped. Victoria narrowed her eyes. Anyone can claim a rating. Check the FAA registry. Caleb James Reed, certificate number 4471628. "I'll wait." She stared at him for a long moment. Then she turned to Frank. "Pull it up." Frank scrambled for his tablet. His fingers moved fast, and 30 seconds later, his face went white. "Ma'am," Frank said quietly, "he's rated on everything he just said. And then some." Victoria turned back to Caleb. Something shifted in her expression. Not respect, not yet, but the beginning of doubt. The first crack in the wall she built between people like her and people like him. "If you crash my $65 million aircraft," she said, "I will end you." "Understood. You have 30 minutes. Caleb walked past her without another word. He walked past Garrett, past the ops crew, past the fuelers who were now staring at him like they'd never seen him before. He crossed the hangar floor, his boots leaving greasy prints on the polished concrete, and he climbed the air stairs of the Bombardier Global 8000 like he'd done it 1,000 times. Because he had. Torres was already in the right seat, looking like a kid on his first day of school. His hands were shaking. His checklist was open to the wrong page. Caleb dropped into the left seat and felt the leather give under his weight. The familiar shape of it. The way his hands naturally found the yoke. The way his eyes moved across the instrument panel, not in search, but in recognition. 10 years. 10 years since he'd sat in a cockpit. 10 years since he'd heard the whine of engines spooling up around him. 10 years since he'd felt the vibration of raw power waiting to be unleashed. And in that moment, all 10 years collapsed into nothing. "You Torres?" Caleb asked without looking at him. "Yes, sir. First Officer Alex Torres. I want you to know I've only got about 400 hours total, and I don't need your resume. I need you to listen and do exactly what I say. Can you do that?" Torres nodded fast. "Yes, sir." "Good. Open your checklist to pre-flight. Page 1. Start reading." Torres fumbled the pages. "Before starting engines, parking brake. Set. Battery master. On. External power. Disconnected. Keep going. They moved through the checklist with a rhythm that surprised Torres. Every response from Caleb was immediate. No hesitation. No double-checking. Like the man had the entire manual burned into his memory. Because he did. Caleb keyed the radio. Meridian ground. This is November 77 Hotel Delta, requesting engine start and taxi clearance. Destination Dulles. 2 souls on board. The tower responded. November 77 Hotel Delta. Roger. Cleared to start. Taxi via Alpha to runway 27. Altimeter 3012. Alpha to 27 3012. November 77 Hotel Delta. Caleb's voice was different now. Not louder, not harder, but certain. The voice of a man who had once talked jets through situations that would make airline pilots quit on the spot. Torres noticed it. He stared at Caleb's hands as they moved across the throttle quadrant, the overhead panel, the flight management system. Every input was precise. Every motion was efficient. No wasted movement. No hesitation. "Sir," Torres said quietly as they began to taxi, "can I ask you something?" "Make it quick." "Who are you?" Caleb's jaw tightened, just barely. A muscle in his cheek twitched the way it always did when someone got close to the door he kept locked. "I'm the guy in the left seat," he said. "That's all you need to know." They reached the runway threshold. Caleb brought the aircraft to a full stop and completed his final checks. Engine instruments, all green. Flight controls, full and free. Trim, set. Flaps, configured. He took a single breath. The last time he'd done this, Marcus Jinx Reyes had been on his wing. 26 years old, best young stick in the Air Force. A kid who used to tape pictures of the space shuttle inside his helmet and talk about walking on Mars. Jinx never made it to Mars. He never made it past 26. Caleb's hands tightened on the yoke. Meridian Tower, November 77 Hotel Delta, ready for departure, runway 27. November 77 Hotel Delta, winds 240 at 12, cleared for takeoff, runway 27. Cleared for takeoff, 27, November 77 Hotel Delta. He pushed the throttles forward. Both Rolls-Royce Pearl engines roared to life with a sound that Caleb felt in his spine. The jets surged forward, pressing them both into their seats. Torres gripped the armrest. Caleb's hands were steady. 80 knots. 100 knots. V1. V1, Torres called out, his voice cracking. Rotate! Caleb pulled back on the yoke, and the $65 million aircraft lifted off the runway like it had been waiting for him. Like it remembered him. The nose pitched up at exactly 15 degrees. The gear retracted with a clean thump, and the jet climbed into the morning sky with an authority that made Torres stop breathing. It was flawless. Not just good, not just competent. Flawless in the way that only comes from thousands of hours, hundreds of takeoffs, and the kind of instinct that can't be taught in any school. Down on the ground, Victoria Hale stood on the tarmac with her arms crossed, watching the jet disappear into the clouds. Frank stood beside her, still holding his tablet. "Ma'am," Frank said carefully, "I dug a little deeper on Reed's record. And he's not just type-rated. He was a military test pilot. Air Force. Flew experimental aircraft at Edwards Air Force Base for 6 years. His record is classified above what I can access, but what's public is, well, he was one of the best they ever had." Victoria said nothing. "There's also a note," Frank continued. "An incident report. 11 years ago, a test flight over the Mojave. His wingman was killed, a lieutenant named Marcus Reyes. After that, Reed resigned his commission and disappeared. Victoria turned to look at Frank. For the first time that morning, she didn't look angry. She looked like a woman who had just realized she'd been standing next to a giant and thought he was small. "He's been working here for 3 years," she said quietly. "Yes, ma'am." "Right under my nose." "Yes, ma'am." She looked back at the sky where the jet had vanished. "What have I done?" she whispered. Nobody answered. The tarmac was empty now. The crew had gone back inside. The fuelers had returned to their trucks. The hangar resumed its normal rhythm, as if nothing extraordinary had just happened. But something had. At 37,000 feet, Caleb leveled the aircraft and engaged the autopilot. The sky was clear, unlimited visibility. The kind of sky that makes you forget the ground exists. Torres was staring at him. "Go ahead," Caleb said. "Sir, I looked you up while we were climbing, on my phone. I know I shouldn't have, but..." "But you did." "You were a test pilot at Edwards. You flew the X-47 and the..." "That was a long time ago." "Sir, with respect, why are you fixing tires?" Caleb didn't answer right away. He stared straight ahead at the blue nothing that stretched in every direction. The same blue that used to make him feel invincible. The same blue that took Jinx away. "Because my son needs a father who comes home every night," Caleb said. "Not a flag and a folded letter." Torres went quiet. They flew in silence for a while. Just the steady hum of the engines and the occasional crackle of ATC handing them off to the next sector. Then Caleb spoke again, almost to himself. He was 26. His name was Marcus. Everyone called him Jinx because he said it was bad luck not to have a nickname. He used to say that the only thing better than flying was flying faster. And one day, I couldn't keep him safe. Torres didn't know what to say, so he said the only honest thing he could. "I'm sorry, sir." Caleb nodded once, slowly. "I am too." The jet cut through the sky in a straight, clean line. Destination Dulles, 47 minutes out. The sun was climbing behind them, throwing long golden light across the instrument panel. Caleb reached into his chest pocket and pulled out a worn photograph, creased and faded from years of handling. 2 men in flight suits, standing in front of an experimental jet, both grinning, both young, both believing they were untouchable. He looked at it for 3 seconds. Then he slid it back into his pocket. "Torres." "Sir?" "You've got 400 hours. That's nothing, but it's a start. Keep your hands on the controls and your eyes on the instruments, and I'll teach you something today." Torres straightened in his seat. "Yes, sir." "Good. Now read me the descent checklist. We've got a CEO to deliver." In somewhere far below, in a hangar that smelled like jet fuel and coffee, a torn rag sat on a tool cart where a mechanic had left it. A mechanic who, for the first time in 10 years, had remembered who he really was. The Bombardier touched down at Dulles with the kind of landing that made Torres grip the armrest and then immediately let go, embarrassed. No bounce, no float, just a firm, confident kiss of rubber on concrete that said everything about the man in the left seat. Caleb pulled the thrust reversers and brought the jet to taxi speed without a word. His eyes moved across the instruments the same way they had for the entire flight. Calm, precise, like a surgeon checking vitals after a flawless operation. Torres exhaled. He hadn't realized he'd been holding his breath for the last 30 seconds. "Sir," Torres said, "that was the smoothest landing I've ever been a part of." "It was adequate," Caleb said. "You floated your callouts on the approach. Altitude calls need to be sharp. I called 500 feet before you did. That can't happen." "Yes, sir. I'll work on it." "You will, because next time I might not be in this seat." Caleb taxied the jet to the private terminal and brought it to a stop on the designated spot. He ran through the shutdown checklist methodically. Every switch and lever returned to its proper position. When the engines wound down and the cabin fell silent, he sat still for a moment. Just one moment. His hands were on his thighs, his eyes were closed, and in that brief silence, he let himself feel it. The thing he hadn't felt in 10 years. The completeness of it. The rightness of a flight well flown. The old rhythm that lived in his bones and never really left. Then he opened his eyes, and it was over. Torres, handle the post-flight. Log the times. I'll be outside. Yes, sir. Caleb stood up from the left seat, and his knees reminded him he wasn't 32 anymore. He walked through the cabin, past the leather seats and the polished wood trim and the crystal glasses that cost more than his monthly rent. He stepped out onto the air stairs and into the thick Virginia heat. A black town car was already waiting on the ramp. The driver opened the rear door, and Victoria Hale stepped out. She had changed during the flight. Different shoes, different energy. The fury from the hangar was gone, replaced by something Caleb couldn't quite read. She walked toward him, stopped about 5 feet away, close enough to talk, far enough to maintain the distance she was used to keeping between herself and people who worked with their hands. "We made it in time," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "The meeting is in 40 minutes. I need to be at the Pentagon by noon." "Then you should get moving." She didn't move. She stood there, studying him the way she studied balance sheets, looking for the number that didn't add up. "Frank sent me your file while we were in the air," she said. Caleb's expression didn't change. "Frank talks too much. He told me you were a test pilot, Edwards Air Force Base." "That's correct." "He told me your security clearance was higher than most generals." "Was," past tense. "He told me about the accident." Caleb's jaw shifted, that muscle in his cheek again, the one that twitched when someone touched the thing he didn't want touched. "Frank really does talk too much," Caleb said quietly. Victoria took a half step closer. "Why didn't you say something? When I asked if anyone could fly, why did you let me humiliate you first?" "You didn't humiliate me, ma'am. You asked a question. I answered it." "I mocked you." "I've been mocked before. It doesn't change what I can do." She looked at him hard. Victoria Hale was not a woman who apologized. She had built Hale Dynamics from a single leased hangar into a $400 million operation. She had fired board members, outmaneuvered competitors, and survived 2 hostile takeover attempts. Apologies were not in her vocabulary. But something about this man made her want to find the word. "I underestimated you," she said. "That's not something I do often." "Everybody does it. I make it easy." "Why?" Caleb looked past her at the town car, at the driver standing with his hands folded, at the terminal building where important people were doing important things. "Because I'm not trying to be seen, Ms. Hale. I'm trying to raise my kid." Victoria opened her mouth to respond, but her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, then back at Caleb. "I have to go, but this conversation isn't finished." "It is for me." She stared at him for another second, then turned and walked to the car. The driver closed the door behind her, and the town car pulled away, disappearing around the corner of the terminal. Caleb stood on the ramp, alone. The sun was overhead now, pressing down on him like a hot hand. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. 2 texts from Owen. The first one said, "Dad, are you coming home for dinner?" The second one said, "I made a new paper airplane. This one has wings like a real jet." Caleb typed back, "I'll be home. Save me a seat at the table. And save that airplane. We're testing it tonight. 3 rocket emojis came back. He slid the phone away and walked back toward the jet. Torres was standing at the bottom of the air stairs with his logbook, looking at Caleb like a kid who just found out his teacher used to be an astronaut. "Sir, I have a question." "You always have a question, Torres." "When we get back to Meridian, what happens? I mean, with you? Are you going back to the maintenance bay?" Caleb reached for the handrail of the air stairs. "That's where my tools are." "But after what just happened, after what you did today, how can you just go back to changing brake pads?" "Because brake pads matter, Torres. Every bolt I tighten keeps someone alive. There's no shame in that." "I didn't say there was shame. I said it doesn't make sense. You're one of the best pilots I've ever seen, and I've trained with guys who have 10,000 hours. Hours don't make a pilot. Judgment does. And my judgment told me 10 years ago that my son needed me on the ground more than the Air Force needed me in the sky." Torres shook his head slowly. "Your son is lucky." "No, I'm lucky. He's the best thing I ever did. The only mission I never failed." They flew back to Meridian in the late afternoon. The return flight was quieter. Torres ran the radios under Caleb's supervision, and Caleb corrected him twice on his altitude callouts and once on his radio phraseology. By the time they crossed into Meridian's airspace, Torres was flying with noticeably more confidence. "Better," Caleb said as Torres executed the approach. "Keep your speed stable. Don't chase the needle." "Yes, sir." "And stop calling me sir. My name is Caleb." Torres smiled for the first time all day. "Yes, sir, Caleb." The landing was Torres's. It wasn't perfect. A slight bounce on the mains, a touch of drift corrected a half-second late. But it was safe, and it was controlled, and Caleb gave him a nod that meant more than any grade on any check ride. They taxied to the ramp and shut down the engines. Caleb completed the logbook entries, signed off on the flight, and handed Torres the pen. "You did all right today," Caleb said. "I had a good captain." "You had a mechanic who got lucky. Don't make it more than it is." Caleb grabbed his thermos from the cockpit, walked down the air stairs, and headed straight for the maintenance bay. He didn't look at the operations building. He didn't stop to talk to anyone. He just walked, the same way he walked every day, like a man who knew exactly where he belonged and didn't need anyone to tell him. But the hangar was different when he got there. People were looking at him. Not the quick glances he was used to. Not the dismissive once-overs from pilots or the blank stares from the admin staff. These were real looks, the kind that carry weight. A fueler named Danny, a young guy who'd been on the ramp that morning, stopped him near the door. "Hey, Reed, is it true? You really flew the Global?" "I brought it back in one piece, didn't I?" "Man, that's insane. Garrett's been telling everyone you probably just sat on the jump seat and watched Torres fly." "Garrett can say whatever Garrett wants." "But it's not true, right? You actually flew it. Left seat." Caleb looked at Danny. The kid was maybe 23, eager. The kind of young man who still believed that doing good work got you noticed. "I flew it," Caleb said. "And now I'm going back to work. You should too." Danny nodded, but his eyes were wide. "Yes, sir." Caleb walked into the maintenance bay and found his toolbox exactly where he'd left it. His coffee was still on the break room table, cold now. He poured it out, refilled his thermos from the pot, and opened his work orders for the afternoon. 3 routine inspections, 1 tire change, a nav light replacement on a King Air. Normal, ordinary, invisible. He liked it that way. But the day wasn't done with him yet. At 4:15, Frank walked into the maintenance bay with a look on his face that Caleb recognized immediately. It was the look of a man carrying a message he didn't want to deliver. "Reed, got a minute?" "I've got a King Air nav light that needs my minute." This is important. Caleb set down his screwdriver. What is it, Frank? Hale called, from D.C. She wants to see you tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock, her office. No, Caleb. I said no. I flew her jet. The job is done. I'm not interested in a meeting. Frank rubbed the back of his neck. Look, I don't know what she wants, but when Victoria Hale says she wants to see someone, that someone shows up. That's how it works around here. That's how it works for people who need this job more than they need their dignity. You need this job, Caleb. You've got a kid. That landed. Caleb felt it in his stomach. Frank wasn't wrong. $11 an hour wasn't much, but it paid for the apartment, the groceries, and Owen's school supplies. Losing it wasn't an option. 8 o'clock, Caleb repeated. 8 o'clock. Her office is on the 3rd floor of the ops building. Wear something clean. I'll wear what I wear. Frank almost smiled. Of course you will. That night, Caleb picked Owen up from the neighbor's house where he stayed after school. Mrs. Patterson, a 70-year-old retired teacher who smelled like lavender and oatmeal cookies, met him at the door. He's been talking about paper airplanes all afternoon, she said. Something about wings like a real jet. That's my boy. Owen came running out with his backpack bouncing, and a paper airplane clutched in his fist like a trophy. Dad, look! I added winglets! Caleb knelt down and took the airplane carefully, turning it over in his hands. The folds were surprisingly precise for a 9-year-old. The winglets were angled correctly, not by accident. Where'd you learn about winglets? Caleb asked. YouTube. There's this channel about how planes work. Did you know winglets reduce drag by up to 5%? I did know that. How? Caleb handed the airplane back. Lucky guess. Come on, let's go home and test this thing. They walked the 4 blocks to their apartment. It was a small place. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen that doubled as a dining room. The walls were mostly bare except for Owen's drawings, which were taped up everywhere. Airplanes mostly. Some rockets. One drawing of Caleb that made him look like a superhero with a wrench. Caleb made dinner. Spaghetti with meat sauce. Owen sat at the kitchen counter doing homework, asking questions between math problems. Dad, what did you do today? Caleb stirred the sauce. Worked on some planes? Same as always? Pretty much. Anything cool happen? Caleb thought about the cockpit, the throttles in his hands, the sky opening up in front of him like a door he thought he'd closed forever. The sound of the engines and the way his heart had hammered in his chest during those first 30 seconds of the takeoff roll. Nah, he said. Just a regular day. Owen went back to his math. Caleb watched him for a moment, and something heavy moved in his chest. Not pain, not regret, something more like the weight of a choice he'd made a long time ago that he'd make again without hesitation. After dinner, they tested the paper airplane in the hallway. Owen threw it 6 times. It flew straight every time, gliding on those little winglets like it knew exactly what it was doing. Dad, I want to be a pilot when I grow up, Owen said. Caleb caught the airplane on its 7th flight. He held it in his hands and stared at it. You can be anything you want, kid. But I want to be a pilot, like the ones at your airport. Those guys are good. Are you better? The question hit Caleb in a place he didn't expect. He looked at his son, at those bright eyes that hadn't learned yet how the world works, that hadn't yet discovered how it can take the thing you love and twist it into the thing you fear. I'm just a mechanic, buddy. But Mrs. Patterson says you can be more than one thing. She says people have layers, like onions. Caleb laughed, a real laugh, the kind that started in his belly and surprised him on the way out. Mrs. Patterson is a smart lady. So are you more than one thing? I'm your dad. That's the main thing. What's the other thing?
Caleb looked at the paper airplane in his hand. Then he knelt down, eye level with Owen, and held it out. The other thing is the guy who's going to teach you how to build a better airplane than this one. Go get some paper, the thick kind from the printer. Owen's face lit up. He ran to the desk, grabbed a stack of paper, and brought it back like he was delivering gold. They sat on the living room floor for an hour, building paper airplanes. Caleb showed Owen how to fold a delta wing, how to adjust the center of gravity by adding a small paper clip to the nose, how to bend the trailing edge to create a slight pitch-up moment that would keep the airplane in the stable glide. Owen absorbed every word. His small hands mimicked Caleb's with surprising accuracy, and when they launched the new design down the hallway, it flew twice as far as the original. "Dad, how do you know all this stuff?"
I read a lot of books when I was your age.
"About airplanes?"
About everything that flies. Owen picked up the airplane and studied it with a seriousness that made him look 10 years older.
"I'm going to build a real one someday."
I believe you.
"Will you help me?"
Every step of the way.
Owen grinned. That grin again. The one that was worth more than every flight Caleb ever made, and every medal he never talked about. They cleaned up the paper scraps, and Caleb put Owen to bed at 8:30. He read him 2 chapters of a book about a kid who builds a rocket in his backyard, and by the end of the 2nd chapter, Owen was asleep. Caleb sat on the edge of the bed for a while, listening to his son breathe. The apartment was quiet, the kind of quiet that used to bother him when he first left the Air Force, when the silence felt like punishment instead of peace. Now it felt like home. He stood up, turned off the light, and walked to the kitchen. He poured himself a glass of water and leaned against the counter. His phone sat on the table. He picked it up and scrolled through his contacts until he found a name he hadn't called in years. Colonel Ray Whitfield, retired. His old commanding officer at Edwards. The man who had pinned his wings on him 20 years ago. The man who had stood in his hospital room after the accident and told him that what happened to Jinx wasn't his fault. The man Caleb hadn't spoken to since the day he turned in his resignation. He stared at the name for a long time. Then he put the phone down and walked to the window. Tomorrow, he had a meeting with Victoria Hale, a woman who had looked at him like he was nothing, and now wanted something from him. He didn't know what she wanted. He didn't particularly care, but he knew one thing. Whatever she offered, it would have to fit around the only job that mattered, the one waiting in the bedroom down the hall, sleeping with a paper airplane on the nightstand. Caleb finished his water, washed the glass, and set it on the rack to dry. He turned off the kitchen light and stood in the darkness of his small apartment, listening to the silence. Somewhere out there, 37,000 feet above the world, jets were flying through the night sky. He could almost hear them. He could almost feel the yoke in his hands, the thrust pushing him forward, the impossible freedom of being above everything. Almost. He turned away from the window and walked to his bedroom. He set his alarm for 5 o'clock, the same as every morning. He lay down on the bed and closed his eyes, and for the first time in 10 years, Caleb Reed dreamed about flying. The alarm went off at 5, and Caleb was already awake. He'd been staring at the ceiling for 20 minutes, running the conversation in his head. Not the one with Victoria, the one with himself. The argument he'd been having since Frank told him about the meeting. One voice said, "Go. Hear her out. Keep the peace." The other voice said, "Stay in the maintenance bay where it's safe, where nobody asks questions, where the past stays buried under grease and routine." He got up, showered, and stood in front of his closet. 2 work jumpsuits hung on the left, 3 flannel shirts and 2 pairs of jeans on the right. 1 button-down shirt, white, still in the dry cleaning bag from Owen's school picture day 6 months ago. He reached for the jumpsuit. Then he stopped.
He pulled the white shirt off the hanger instead, put it on, tucked it into his cleanest pair of jeans, looked at himself in the bathroom mirror, and almost laughed. The shirt was too tight across the shoulders. His hands still had grease worked into the creases of his knuckles that no amount of scrubbing would remove. He looked like exactly what he was, a mechanic trying to look like something else. He untucked the shirt, rolled the sleeves to his elbows, and decided that was as good as it was going to get. Owen was still asleep when Caleb made breakfast. 2 scrambled eggs, 1 piece of toast, a glass of orange juice. He set it on the counter with a note that said, "Bus at 7:15. Don't forget your lunch. Love, Dad." He taped the note to the orange juice glass where Owen couldn't miss it and slipped out the door. The drive to Meridian took 14 minutes. Caleb parked in the employee lot, the same spot he always parked in, 3rd row from the fence. He sat in the truck for a moment with the engine off. 5:45. He was 2 hours early for the meeting. Good. He'd get some work done first. He walked into the maintenance bay and changed into his jumpsuit over the white shirt, grabbed his toolbox, headed for the King Air that still needed its nav light. He worked in silence for an hour, replacing the bulb, checking the wiring, running the test sequence twice because once wasn't enough for Caleb Reed. At 7:30, Garrett walked in. Garrett was everything Caleb wasn't. Loud, polished, a pilot who wore his epaulets like medals and his sunglasses indoors. He had 3,000 hours in his logbook and made sure everyone knew it. He flew the mid-range jets for Hale Dynamics and considered himself the top stick at Meridian. Yesterday, Caleb had flown a jet that Garrett wasn't even rated for. "Reed," Garrett said, leaning against the workbench with his arms crossed. "Heard you've got a meeting with the boss lady." "News travels fast." "Small airport. So what's the play? She gonna give you a gold star for yesterday?" Caleb didn't look up from the nav light housing. "I don't know what she wants." "I do. She wants to feel good about herself. She treated you like dirt. You bailed her out. Now she's got guilt. She'll probably offer you a gift card or something. Maybe a new pair of boots. Maybe. Or maybe she offers you a flying gig. Wouldn't that be something? The grease monkey gets wings." Caleb set down his screwdriver and looked at Garrett for the first time. "Is there something you want, Garrett?" Garrett's smile tightened. "Just wondering how a mechanic ends up with more type ratings than half the pilots on this field." "I read a lot." "Funny. Real funny. You know what I think? I think you're one of those guys who washed out of something and ended up here. Maybe you flew cargo. Maybe you were a crop duster. Maybe you got your ratings from some school in Florida that hands them out like candy." Caleb stood up slowly. He was 3 inches taller than Garrett and 40 pounds heavier, and when he stood at full height, Garrett took a half step back without meaning to. "You can think whatever you want," Caleb said, "but I'd be careful about saying it too loud, because the next time Ms. Hale needs a pilot on short notice, she's not going to call you." Garrett's face went red. He opened his mouth, closed it, and then walked out of the maintenance bay without another word. Caleb watched him go. He didn't feel good about it. He didn't feel anything about it. Garrett was noise, background static, the kind of man who measures himself against others because he's afraid to measure himself against himself. At 7:50, Caleb stripped off his jumpsuit, hung it on the hook, and walked across the tarmac toward the operations building. The white shirt was wrinkled now. He didn't care. The ops building was a different world from the maintenance bay. Air conditioning, carpet, glass walls, the smell of expensive coffee and printer ink. Caleb felt every eye on him as he walked through the lobby. The receptionist looked up, looked at his hands, and looked confused. "Can I help you?" Caleb Reed, I have an 8 o'clock with Ms. Hale." The receptionist checked her screen, and her eyebrows went up. "3rd floor. Her assistant will meet you at the elevator." "I'll take the stairs." He climbed 3 flights and pushed through the stairwell door into a hallway that was quieter than a church. A young woman in a gray suit was waiting for him. "Mr. Reed? I'm Laura, Ms. Hale's executive assistant. She's ready for you." Laura led him down the hall to a corner office with double doors. She knocked once, opened the door, and stepped aside. Victoria Hale was standing behind her desk, not sitting, standing, as if she'd been waiting on her feet and didn't want Caleb to see her sitting when he came in. "Close the door, Laura." The door clicked shut. Victoria looked at Caleb. Caleb looked at Victoria. The silence lasted exactly 4 seconds, but it felt longer.
"Sit down," she said.
"I'll stand."
"Please, sit."
"I'll stand, ma'am. This won't take long." Victoria's mouth pressed into a thin line. She was used to people doing what she said, but she'd also learned something about Caleb in the last 24 hours. Pushing him didn't work. "Fine, stand." She came around the desk and leaned against the front of it, closing the distance between them. "I'll get to the point. I need a chief pilot." "You have pilots." "I have pilots who can fly the small jets. I need someone who can fly everything in my fleet. The Globals, the Gulfstreams, all of it. Someone with the experience to handle anything that comes up. Someone who can also train and evaluate my other pilots. I need a director of flight operations." "That's a big job." "It's a big company. And after yesterday, I know you can do it." Caleb crossed his arms. "Yesterday was an emergency. I helped out. That doesn't mean I'm looking for a career change." $200,000 a year, full benefits, health insurance for you and your son, retirement plan, flexible scheduling. Caleb didn't flinch, but the number hit him like a gust of wind. He was making $22,000 a year turning wrenches. $200,000 was a different life. A house instead of an apartment. A college fund for Owen. Security he hadn't felt since he wore a uniform. "That's generous," he said carefully. "It's not generous. It's what the position pays. I don't do charity, Mr. Reed. I do business." "And what does this business look like day to day?" "You'd fly the long-range missions. DC, London, Dubai, wherever the contracts take us. You'd oversee pilot training and standardization. You'd report directly to me." "And when I'm in London, who's with my son?" Victoria paused. It was clear she hadn't thought about that. Her world didn't include 9-year-olds who built paper airplanes and needed someone to make them scrambled eggs in the morning.
"We can work around your schedule," she said. "I'm not unreasonable."
"With respect, ma'am, 24 hours ago, you screamed at your entire crew because one pilot had a heart attack and you didn't have a backup plan. That's not a scheduling problem. That's a leadership problem." Victoria's jaw tightened. Nobody talked to her like that. Nobody walked into her office and told her she had a leadership problem. But Caleb said it the same way he said everything. Calm. Factual. Without malice. "Go on," she said, and that surprised even her. "You have 12 jets and not enough qualified pilots to fly them. You have maintenance crews working double shifts for poverty wages. Your safety reporting system is a suggestion box that nobody checks. And your training program consists of putting low-hour pilots in seats they're not ready for and hoping nothing goes wrong." "How do you know all this?" "Because I've been on the ground for 3 years, Ms. Hale. I see everything. Mechanics talk. Fuelers talk. Pilots talk when they think nobody's listening. And the guy who fixes the landing gear hears all of it." Victoria was quiet for a moment. She walked back behind her desk and sat down, not because she needed to, because she needed a second to process the fact that the most honest assessment of her company had just come from a man she didn't know existed 2 days ago. "If I offered you this job," she said slowly, "what would you change?" "Everything." "Be specific." "First, you raise maintenance pay. My guys are making $11 an hour to keep $65 million airplanes in the air. That's not just insulting, it's dangerous. Tired, underpaid mechanics make mistakes. Mistakes kill people." "What else?" "You build a real training pipeline. Torres has 400 hours, and you had him slotted as a first officer on a Global. That's reckless. He needs another 1,000 hours in smaller aircraft before he touches a heavy jet. You hire experienced captains and pair them with your junior pilots for structured upgrade programs. That's expensive. Funerals are more expensive." Victoria stared at him. No one had ever put it to her that bluntly. The board members spoke in percentages and risk matrices. The lawyers spoke in liability language. Caleb spoke in body counts. And she couldn't argue with any of it. "What else?" she asked again. "You treat your people like people, not like equipment, not like line items on a budget. I've watched your crew chief, a man named Carl Bridges, work 16-hour shifts 3 days in a row because you cut the maintenance staff to save money. Carl's got 2 bad knees and a daughter in college. He does it because he's afraid if he complains, he'll get replaced. That's no way to run an airline. We're not an airline. You fly people through the sky in metal tubes at 500 miles an hour. You're an airline. Act like one." The office went silent again. Victoria leaned back in her chair and folded her hands. Caleb could see her calculating, the way she always did, running the numbers, weighing the cost against the risk, deciding if this man was worth the disruption he'd bring. "You're asking me to restructure my entire operation," she said. "No, ma'am. You asked me what I'd change. I told you. Whether you do it is up to you." "And if I agree? If I give you the authority to implement these changes?" "Then I need it in writing, not a handshake. A contract, with clear terms for my role, my schedule, and the treatment of every crew member on this field." "You don't trust me." "I don't know you, but I know how power works. People make promises when they need something. They break them when they don't." Victoria almost smiled. Almost. "You're not what I expected." "Nobody ever is." She stood up and extended her hand across the desk. "I'll have my legal team draft something by end of week. But I want you flying by Monday." Caleb looked at her hand. He didn't take it. "One more thing," he said. "What?" "My schedule. I fly during school hours. I'm home by the time the bus drops Owen off at 3:30. No overnight trips unless I have 48 hours notice so I can arrange childcare. Non-negotiable." "That limits the routes I can assign you." "Then it limits them." Victoria's hand was still extended. Her eyes searched his face for some sign of flexibility, some crack where she could push through and get more. There wasn't one. "Fine," she said. Caleb took her hand. His grip was firm, his calluses pressed against her smooth palm, and for a moment, the distance between their worlds collapsed into the space of a handshake. "Monday," she said. "Monday." He let go, turned, and walked to the door. His hand was on the handle when Victoria spoke again. "Caleb." He stopped, but didn't turn around. "The man who died, your wingman. What was he like?" Caleb stood still. His hand tightened on the door handle. The question came from a direction he hadn't expected, and it hit him in a place he kept locked. "He was 26, Caleb said, his back still to her. "He wanted to go to space. He used to say that the sky wasn't the limit. It was the starting line."
I'm sorry.
So am I. He opened the door and walked out, down the hallway, down the stairs, through the lobby where the receptionist watched him pass with curious eyes, out into the morning heat where the tarmac shimmered and the smell of jet fuel hung in the air like perfume. Frank was waiting for him by the maintenance bay door. "Well," Frank said. "She offered me a job." Frank's eyes went wide. "Flying?" "Director of Flight Operations." "Lord have mercy! What did you say?" "I said Monday." Frank let out a breath he'd apparently been holding since yesterday. "Caleb, I don't even know what to say. That's incredible." "It's a job, Frank. Same as this one, just different tools." "It's not the same, and you know it. You've been hiding down here for 3 years. Before that, you were flying jets that most people don't even know exist. I was a man who made a mistake and lost his best friend. And I came here to disappear. And I did. And it was fine." "Was it?" Caleb looked at Frank. The question hung between them like smoke. "Owen needs stability," Caleb said. "He needs a father who's present. That hasn't changed." "But you have. I saw your face yesterday, Caleb, when you climbed into that cockpit. I've known you for 3 years, and I've never seen you look like that. You looked alive." Caleb didn't answer. He walked past Frank into the maintenance bay and picked up his screwdriver. The King Air's nav light still needed its final inspection. He completed it in silence, signed off the work order, and moved on to the next task. But Frank's words stayed with him. They stayed with him through the tire change on the Cessna. They stayed with him through the brake inspection on the Learjet. They stayed with him when he walked to the fence at 6:15 and watched the school bus drive past with Owen's small hand waving from the third window. You looked alive. That night, after dinner, after homework, after the paper airplane testing session that had become their nightly ritual, Caleb sat in his kitchen alone. Owen was in bed. The apartment was quiet. He picked up his phone and scrolled to Colonel Whitfield's number again. His thumb hovered over the call button for 30 seconds. Then he pressed it. It rang 4 times. 5. 6. "Hello?" The voice was older than Caleb remembered, rougher, but unmistakable. "Colonel, it's Caleb Reed." A long pause. The kind of pause that carries 10 years of silence and everything that fills it. "Caleb." Another pause. "I've been waiting for this call for a very long time." "I know. I'm sorry it took so long." "Don't apologize, just talk to me. Tell me what's going on." Caleb leaned against the counter and closed his eyes. "I flew today, sir. Yesterday, actually. A civilian job. Bombardier Global 8000. And today I got offered a position as Director of Flight Operations for a private aviation company." "And you're calling me because you don't know if you should take it?" "I'm calling you because you're the only person who knows the whole story. And I need someone to tell me the truth." "The truth about what?" "About whether I deserve to fly again. After what happened to Jinx." The silence on the other end was heavy. Caleb could hear the colonel breathing, could almost hear him choosing his words the way a man chooses his steps on a narrow bridge. "Caleb, I'm going to tell you something I should have told you 11 years ago, when you were in that hospital room. I told you it wasn't your fault, and you didn't believe me. So let me say it differently this time." "I'm listening." Marcus Reyes died because of a mechanical failure in his aircraft. The investigation proved that. The board confirmed it. The engineering team found a fatigue crack in the stabilizer actuator that nobody caught on inspection. Nobody. Not you, not the ground crew, not the engineers who built it. It was a failure that no pilot, no matter how skilled, could have prevented or recovered from. I was flight lead. I was responsible for him. You were responsible for the mission. And when his jet went down, you broke formation, dove after him, and guided him through the ejection sequence, under conditions that would have made any other pilot pull away. You stayed with him until the last possible second. The only reason you survived is because you ejected 400 feet below the minimum safe altitude. 400 feet, Caleb. You almost died trying to save him. Almost doesn't matter. He's still gone. Yes, he is. And nothing you do will change that. But punishing yourself for 10 years doesn't honor him. Hiding your talent doesn't bring him back. Living half a life because you're afraid of the sky doesn't make you a better father. It makes you a man who's letting fear win. Caleb's throat tightened. He pressed his hand against his eyes and breathed through it. You were the finest pilot I ever commanded, the colonel continued. And Jinx looked up to you more than anyone in that squadron. Do you know what he told me the week before that flight? He said, Caleb Reed is the reason I believe I can get to NASA. Because if he can push the edge of what's possible, so can I. Caleb couldn't speak. He stood in his kitchen with the phone pressed to his ear and tears running down a face that hadn't cried in years. Take the job, Caleb. Fly again. Not for the company, not for the money. Fly for Jinx. Fly for your boy. And fly for yourself. Because you've paid enough. Caleb breathed in, breathed out, wiped his face with the back of his hand. Thank you, Colonel. Don't thank me. Just don't disappear for another 10 years. I won't. And Caleb? Sir? Call me Ray. I've been retired for 6 years. The colonel thing makes my knees hurt. Caleb laughed. It was broken and wet and real, and it was the best thing he'd felt in a long time. Good night, Ray. Good night, son. Go fly. Caleb set the phone down on the counter. He stood in the dark kitchen for a long time, letting the silence settle around him like water. Then he walked to Owen's bedroom door and pushed it open just enough to see inside. His son was asleep, one arm hanging off the bed, the paper airplane on the nightstand right where it always was. Caleb watched him breathe, in and out, in and out. The steady rhythm of a child who trusts that the world is safe because his father is in the next room. I'm going to fly again, buddy, Caleb whispered. And one day, I'm going to teach you how. He closed the door gently and walked to his own bedroom. He set the alarm for 5 o'clock, lay down, and this time, when sleep came, he didn't fight the dream. He let the sky take him. Monday came faster than Caleb expected. He dropped Owen at the bus stop at 7:10, same as always. Owen hugged him around the waist, same as always. But this time, Owen looked up and said something that caught Caleb off guard. Dad, you look different today. Different how? I don't know. Like you're going somewhere important. Caleb knelt down and straightened Owen's backpack straps. I am going somewhere important. Same place I always go. The airport? The airport. But you look like you're going to a different part of it. The kid was sharp. Too sharp for 9. Caleb smiled and tapped him on the nose. Get on the bus, detective. I'll see you at 3:30. Owen ran to the bus, climbed the steps, and disappeared into the third window. The small hand waved. Caleb waved back. The bus pulled away. Caleb stood on the sidewalk for a moment, then walked to his truck. On the passenger seat was a bag he'd packed the night before. Inside it was a white button-down shirt, pressed this time, a pair of dark slacks he'd bought at the thrift store on Saturday, and a pair of black shoes that he'd polished until they reflected light. He drove to Meridian and parked in his usual spot, walked into the maintenance bay, hung his jumpsuit on the hook, and changed into the clothes from the bag in the bathroom.
When he looked at himself in the scratched mirror above the sink, he almost didn't recognize the man staring back. The same hands, the same grease-stained knuckles that no amount of scrubbing could fully clean. But the posture was different. The eyes were different. Something had shifted behind them, like a light coming on in a room that had been dark for a long time. Frank was the first to see him walk out. "Well, look at you," Frank said.
"I didn't know you owned real shoes." "I didn't until Saturday." "How do they feel?" "Like somebody else's feet." Frank laughed. Then his expression turned serious. "You ready for this?" "No." "Good. The day you think you're ready is the day you stop paying attention." Caleb shook Frank's hand. A real handshake. The kind between two men who understand that some moments don't need a lot of words. "Take care of the bay, Frank. Those guys depend on you." "I've been taking care of it long before you got here, Reed. Go fly a plane." Caleb walked across the tarmac toward the operations building. The morning sun was already hot, and by the time he pushed through the front doors, he could feel sweat gathering at the back of his neck. The receptionist recognized him this time and waved him through without a word. Laura was waiting at the elevator.
"Good morning, Mr. Reed. Miss Hale is in the conference room. There are some people she'd like you to meet."
"What people?"
"Your team."
Caleb followed her down the third-floor hallway and through a set of glass doors into a conference room where 6 people were already seated around a long table. Victoria stood at the head, her arms crossed, watching Caleb enter with an expression that was halfway between satisfaction and scrutiny. "Everyone, this is Caleb Reed, your new Director of Flight Operations." Nobody clapped. Nobody smiled. 5 pilots and 1 operations coordinator stared at Caleb with the kind of skepticism that pilots reserve for anyone who threatens the chain of command. Garrett was sitting at the far end of the table. Of course he was. "Have a seat, Caleb," Victoria said. He sat. Victoria gestured around the table. "You already know First Officer Torres. Next to him is Captain Lisa Nakamura. She flies our Gulfstream fleet. Then Captain Derek Holt, Captain Sam Wilder, and First Officer Jenny Park. And at the end is Garrett Nash, who has been serving as our informal senior pilot." Informal. Caleb caught the word. So did Garrett, whose face tightened like someone had yanked a string. "As of today," Victoria continued, "Caleb has full authority over pilot training, standardization, route assignments, and crew scheduling. All flight-related decisions go through him. I expect full cooperation." "Excuse me," Garrett leaned forward. "I've been flying for this company for 4 years. I have more hours than anyone at this table. And now we're supposed to take orders from a mechanic?" The room tensed. Torres looked at his hands. Lisa Nakamura studied Caleb with careful, neutral eyes. The others shifted in their seats. Caleb looked at Garrett. He didn't rush to respond. He let the silence do its work first. "You're right," Caleb said. "You do have more hours than most people at this table. That experience matters, and I respect it." Garrett blinked, surprised by the acknowledgement. "But hours in a logbook don't tell me everything," Caleb continued. "They tell me you've been in the air. They don't tell me how you handle an engine failure on a short runway. They don't tell me how you manage a crew when things go wrong. They don't tell me whether you'd sacrifice your pride to keep your passengers alive." "I've handled plenty of emergencies." "Good. Then you won't have any trouble with the evaluation I'm going to require of every pilot in this room, including myself." "Evaluation?" Derek Holt spoke for the first time. "What kind of evaluation?" "A full proficiency check, oral exam, systems review, and a check ride. Every pilot. No exceptions. We're going to establish a baseline so I know exactly what this team can do and where we need to improve." "That's insulting," Garrett said. "I'm a type-rated captain. I don't need a check ride from a guy who was changing my tires last week. You're right. You were type-rated 3 years ago. Ratings expire if they're not maintained with recurrent training.
When was your last proficiency check, Garrett? Garrett opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. The company didn't require one. I know, that's the problem. Starting today, it's required. Every 6 months. For everyone. Victoria was watching the exchange from the head of the table. She didn't intervene. She didn't need to. Caleb was handling it with the same calm authority he'd shown in the cockpit. And for the first time, she saw what that authority looked like when it was aimed at something larger than a single flight. I'm not here to make anyone feel bad, Caleb said, and he looked around the table, making eye contact with each pilot in turn. I'm here because this company has been running on luck, and luck runs out. Captain Briggs had a heart attack on the ramp. What if it had happened at 30,000 feet? What if Torres had been alone in that cockpit with no one to step in? Torres swallowed hard. We build redundancy, Caleb continued. We build skill. We build a culture where every pilot in this room can handle anything that happens. Not because they've memorized a checklist, but because they've trained for it. That's what I'm here to do. Lisa Nakamura spoke up. What's your background, if you don't mind me asking? I don't mind. I was a test pilot at Edwards Air Force Base for 6 years. Before that, I flew tactical missions for the Air Force out of Mellis. I have 12,000 hours, mostly in military aircraft, with type ratings on the Global, the Gulfstream 700, the Falcon 900, and several military platforms. The room went very quiet. Jenny Park, who hadn't said a word, whispered to Torres, 12,000 hours? Torres nodded. He's the real deal. Garrett stared at the table. He didn't look angry anymore. He looked like a man who had just been told the mountain he'd been climbing had another peak behind it. Any other questions? Caleb asked. Nobody spoke. Good. I'll have individual meetings with each of you this week. We'll go over your training records, your currency, and your goals. I'm not your enemy. I'm your captain. And my job is to make sure every one of you goes home safe at the end of every flight. The meeting broke up 20 minutes later. Torres lingered by the door, waiting for the others to leave. When the room was empty except for the two of them, he approached Caleb. That was impressive, Torres said. It was a meeting, Torres, not a combat mission. Garrett looked like he was going to explode. Garrett's going to be fine. He's got talent. He just needs structure and someone to push him past what he thinks his ceiling is. You really believe that? I believe every pilot has more in them than they know, including you. Torres stood a little taller. When do we start training? Tomorrow, 5 a.m. Bring your manuals and a pen, and eat breakfast first. It's going to be a long day. Torres grinned and walked out. Caleb stood alone in the conference room, looking out the glass walls at the tarmac below. He could see the maintenance bay from here, could see the spot where his toolbox used to sit, could see the fence where he'd stand every morning to catch Owen's wave from the bus. That world was 50 yards away and already felt like a different life. Victoria appeared in the doorway. You handled that well. I told the truth, that's all. The truth made Garrett want to punch a wall. Garrett needs to learn that being challenged isn't the same as being disrespected. Victoria walked into the room and stood beside him, looking out at the same tarmac. I've been running this company for 9 years. I've had consultants, board advisors, and 3 different operations managers. None of them told me what you told me on Friday. None of them changed your tires. She almost laughed. No, they didn't. The people closest to the work see the most. That's always been true. The problem is, nobody asks them. I'm asking now. Then listen, because I'm going to say things that make you uncomfortable,
and I'm going to push for changes that cost money. And if you fight me on every one of them, this won't work. I don't fight people who make me money. I'm not here to make you money, Ms. Hale. I'm here to keep people alive. The money will follow if we do this right." Victoria studied him, that calculating look again. But beneath it, something else. Something that Caleb recognized because he'd seen it in the mirror for the last 10 years. Respect born from the realization that you've been wrong. "Then let's do this right," she said. That first week was relentless. Caleb spent 12 hours a day at the operations building, reviewing training records, inspecting aircraft maintenance logs, and redesigning the crew scheduling system. He discovered gaps that made his stomach turn. 2 pilots were flying with expired medical certificates. One aircraft had a recurring hydraulic issue that had been deferred 6 times without repair. The safety reporting system Victoria had in place was, as Caleb had suspected, a joke. 1 report in the last year. 1. He called a mandatory safety meeting on Wednesday. Every pilot, every mechanic, every fueler, every ops coordinator. Standing room only in the hangar bay. "I'm going to say something that might make some of you uncomfortable," Caleb began. "This company has been lucky. Lucky that no one has died. Lucky that no serious incident has made the news. Lucky that the FAA hasn't walked through those doors and shut us down." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Luck is not a safety strategy. Starting today, every person in this hangar has the authority to stop a flight if they see something unsafe. Mechanic, fueler, pilot, it doesn't matter. If something doesn't look right, you raise your hand. You will not be fired. You will not be punished. You will be thanked. Carl Bridges, the crew chief with the bad knees that Caleb had mentioned to Victoria, spoke up from the back. "And who guarantees that? Because last time someone flagged the problem, he got transferred to the night shift." Caleb looked directly at him. "I guarantee it. And if anyone retaliates against a safety report, they'll answer to me, personally. Does that work for you, Carl?" Carl looked surprised that Caleb knew his name. "Yeah, that works." "Good. Now, one more thing. Effective immediately, maintenance staff receives a 15% pay increase. Ms. Hale has approved it." The room erupted. Not in applause. In disbelief. Mechanics looked at each other. Fuelers whispered. Carl Bridges sat down heavily on a crate and put his hand over his mouth. Caleb waited for the noise to settle. "You've been keeping these aircraft in the air with duct tape and determination. That ends today. You'll get the pay, the tools, and the staffing you need. But in return, I expect the highest standards of workmanship. Every inspection by the book. Every discrepancy documented. No shortcuts. No deferrals unless I approve them. Deal?" A chorus of agreement rolled through the hangar. Not the polite agreement of employees humoring a new boss. The genuine agreement of people who had been waiting years for someone to say what Caleb just said. After the meeting, Caleb walked through the maintenance bay and shook hands with every mechanic on shift. He knew most of them by name from his 3 years working alongside them. He asked about their families, their concerns, their ideas for improvement. He listened more than he talked. Danny, the young fueler, caught up with him near the door. "Mr. Reed, I just want you to know, what you did in there, nobody's ever done that for us." "It should have been done a long time ago." "The pay raise alone, man. My wife is going to cry when I tell her." Caleb put his hand on Danny's shoulder. "Then go home and tell her, and tomorrow, come back and do the best work of your life." Danny nodded fast, his eyes shining. "Yes, sir." By Friday, the transformation was visible. The maintenance bay had been reorganized. New tool carts had been ordered. The deferred hydraulic issue on the Gulf Stream was repaired and signed off. Both pilots with expired medicals had been grounded until they completed their renewals. And Caleb had personally conducted evaluation flights with 3 of the 5 pilots, including Garrett.
The flight with Garrett was the one everyone watched. They flew in a Citation 10 for 2 hours. Caleb put Garrett through engine failures, emergency descents, instrument approaches and simulated low visibility, and a crosswind landing that Garrett handled with genuine skill. When they landed, Garrett sat in the cockpit for a moment before speaking. "You're good," Garrett said. "I hate admitting it, but you're really good. You're not bad yourself."
I could have been better, if someone had pushed me like that years ago. You've got the hands, Garrett. You've got the instincts. What you need is discipline and humility. And I'll be honest with you, those are harder to learn than any maneuver. Garrett looked at Caleb. The hostility that had been in his eyes all week was gone. In its place was something raw, something that looked almost like gratitude. "I want to get rated on the Global," Garrett said. "Can you make that happen? If you put in the work, I'll get you in the left seat of a Global inside 6 months." Garrett extended his hand. Caleb shook it. No words were necessary. The handshake said everything that two proud men couldn't say out loud. That afternoon, Caleb sat in his new office, a small room on the second floor with a window overlooking the ramp. It wasn't much. A desk, a computer, a phone, and a framed photo of Owen that Caleb had brought from home. He was reviewing Torres's training plan when his phone buzzed. A text from Owen.
"Dad, are you coming home? Mrs. Patterson made cookies." Caleb checked the time. 3:15. He'd almost lost track. He grabbed his bag, locked the office, and drove home in 14 minutes. When he walked through the door, Owen was at the kitchen counter with a cookie in each hand and chocolate on his chin. "Dad, you're wearing fancy clothes again."
I had a different kind of day.
"Did you fix planes?"
Sort of. I fixed how we take care of planes.
"That sounds boring."
Caleb laughed. It kind of is, but it matters.
"Did you fly?"
Caleb paused. "Yeah, buddy. I flew." Owen's eyes went wide.
"For real? Like, in the air?"
"In the air."
"In a real jet?"
"In a real jet." Owen set both cookies down, and his face transformed into something between awe and hurt.
"Why didn't you tell me you could fly?"
There it was, the question Caleb had been dreading. Not from Victoria, not from Frank, not from Garrett, or Torres, or the Colonel. From his 9-year-old son, standing in the kitchen with chocolate on his face and betrayal in his eyes. Caleb pulled a chair out and sat down so he was at Owen's level. "Come here." Owen didn't move. "You always said you were a mechanic." "I am a mechanic." "But you're also a pilot. That's a big secret, Dad." "I know." "Why didn't you tell me?" Caleb took a breath. He had rehearsed this conversation 100 times in his head over the years, and none of those rehearsals prepared him for the look on his son's face right now. "Because a long time ago, before you were born, I was a pilot in the Air Force. I flew very fast airplanes for the government. And I had a friend, a really good friend, who flew with me. His name was Marcus." Owen's expression shifted. The hurt was still there, but curiosity was creeping in. "What happened to Marcus?" "He had an accident. His airplane broke, and he didn't make it." "He died?" "Yes." Owen was quiet, his 9-year-old brain processing something too big and too heavy for 9 years. "Were you there?" Owen asked. "I was right next to him. I tried to help him, but I couldn't." "Was it your fault?" "No, but for a long time I thought it was. And that's why I stopped flying. Because every time I looked at an airplane, I saw Marcus. And it hurt too much."
Owen walked forward and climbed into the chair next to Caleb. He didn't say anything for a while. He just sat there, his small legs dangling, his cookies forgotten. "Are you flying again now?" "Yes." "Does it still hurt?" Caleb looked at his son, at those bright, honest eyes that didn't know how to be anything but direct. "Sometimes. But I'm learning that you can carry something heavy and still move forward." "Like a plane carries people?" Caleb blinked. "Yeah, exactly like that." "Dad?" "Yeah?" "I'm glad you told me." "I'm glad too, buddy." Owen reached over and picked up one of his cookies. He broke it in half and handed the bigger piece to Caleb.
"Mrs. Patterson says cookies fix everything," Owen said. Caleb took the cookie and bit into it. Chocolate chip, still warm. Mrs. Patterson might be right about that. They sat at the kitchen counter together, eating cookies and not talking. And the silence between them was different from the silences Caleb had known for the last 10 years. It wasn't the silence of grief. It wasn't the silence of hiding. It was the silence of two people who understood each other a little better than they did 5 minutes ago. After dinner that night, Owen didn't ask to test paper airplanes. Instead, he sat on the couch next to Caleb and said, "Tell me about Marcus." So Caleb did. He told Owen about the kid from El Paso who joined the Air Force at 19 because he wanted to see the world from above. He told him about the pictures Marcus taped inside his helmet, about the terrible jokes he told during briefings, about the time he buzzed a control tower at 200 feet and got grounded for a week and said it was worth every second. Owen listened to all of it, every word. And when Caleb finished, Owen said, "He sounds like he was really cool." "He was the coolest person I ever knew." "Cooler than me?" Caleb pulled Owen close and held him. "Nobody's cooler than you, kid. Nobody in the world." Owen leaned into his father's chest and closed his eyes. Within minutes, he was asleep. Caleb carried him to bed, tucked him in, and placed the paper airplane on the nightstand. He walked back to the kitchen and picked up his phone. One new email from Victoria Hale. "Read, the Pentagon contract review is next Thursday. They want a demonstration flight. Full capability showcase. I need my best pilot in the left seat. You in?" Caleb stared at the email for a long time. A demonstration flight for the Pentagon. The kind of flying that would push the aircraft to its limits. The kind of flying he used to live for. The kind of flying that killed Jinx. His thumb hovered over the keyboard. The old fear moved in his chest like something alive. But beneath it, deeper and steadier, was something else. A voice that sounded like the Colonel. A voice that sounded like Jinx himself. "Go fly." Caleb typed 2 words and hit send. "I'm in." He set the phone down, turned off the kitchen light, and walked to his bedroom. Through the wall, he could hear Owen breathing. Steady, trusting, safe. Caleb lay down and closed his eyes. Thursday was 4 days away. 4 days to prepare for the most important flight of his second life. 4 days to prove that the man who walked away from the sky could walk back into it and not fall apart. He didn't know if he could do it, but for the first time, the not knowing didn't scare him. It felt like the moment before takeoff, the engines roaring, the runway stretching out ahead, and the whole sky waiting. Thursday arrived under a sky so clear, it looked like God had wiped it clean for the occasion. Caleb was at Meridian by 4:30 in the morning, an hour before anyone else. He walked straight to the Bombardier Global 8000, the same aircraft he'd flown to D.C. the week before, and began his pre-flight inspection in the dark. Every panel, every hinge, every fluid level and tire pressure and control surface. He checked them all twice, the way he'd done when lives depended on it,
because today they did. Not passengers, something bigger. The future of Hale Dynamics. The Pentagon contract. Victoria's company. And, in a way Caleb hadn't fully admitted to himself yet, his own second chance. By 5:30, the maintenance crew started arriving. Carl Bridges was the first through the door, limping on those bad knees, carrying a coffee that was more sugar than coffee. "You've been out here since before dawn, haven't you?" Carl said. "Couldn't sleep."
Nervous? Caleb pulled his head out of the wheel well and looked at Carl. "Last time I did a demonstration flight, I was 32 years old, flying an experimental jet at Mach 2 over the Mojave Desert for a room full of generals. I wasn't nervous then. And now? Now I've got a 9-year-old who thinks I'm a superhero. That's a lot harder to live up to than a room full of generals." Carl laughed and handed Caleb the coffee. "Drink this. You're going to need the sugar." By 7, the ramp was buzzing. Victoria arrived in her black SUV, followed by 2 sedans carrying 4 Pentagon officials in dark suits. They were escorted to the observation area near the hangar, a roped-off section with chairs and a clear view of the runway. Victoria found Caleb near the nose of the aircraft. She was wearing the kind of expression that Caleb had learned to read over the past week. Controlled on the surface, terrified underneath. "How's the aircraft?" she asked. "Perfect. I inspected it myself." "And you? How are you?" "I'll let you know after I land." She looked at him hard. "Caleb, these people hold the keys to a $400 million contract. If this demonstration goes well, we're set for the next 5 years. If it doesn't,
It'll go well."
how can you be sure?"
"Because I've done this before, and because I spent the last 3 days preparing for every possible scenario, including the ones that only happen in nightmares." Victoria wanted to say more. He could see it. She wanted guarantees, promises, something she could hold on to. But she'd learned enough about Caleb in the past 10 days to know that he didn't deal in promises. He dealt in performance. "Good luck," she said. "I don't need luck, Ms. Hale. I need a clear runway and a tailwind. Go sit with your Pentagon friends. I'll handle the rest." She turned and walked toward the observation area. Caleb watched her go, then climbed the air stairs.
Torres was already in the right seat, checklist open, hands steady. The kid had changed in the last week. Caleb's daily training sessions had sharpened him. His call-outs were crisp. His situational awareness had improved. He still had a long way to go, but the foundation was solid. "Morning, Torres." "Morning, Caleb. Aircraft is prepped. I ran the preliminary checklist. All systems green." "Good. Let's do it again." "Again?" "Everything twice today. No exceptions." They ran through every checklist item a second time. Caleb verified each system personally, his hands moving across the panels with the muscle memory of 12,000 hours. When he was satisfied, he settled into the left seat and took a breath. One breath. That was all he allowed himself. He keyed the radio. "Meridian ground, Wraith 1, requesting engine start and taxi. Demonstration flight, Pentagon observation. 2 souls on board." The tower hesitated. Then, "Wraith 1, you're cleared for engine start. Tie via Bravo to runway 27. Winds 230 at 8. Altimeter 299er8. Be advised, you have priority traffic clearance for the next 60 minutes. Bravo to 27. 299er8. Priority acknowledged. Wraith 1. Torres looked at Caleb. "Wraith, that was your call sign?" "A long time ago." "What does it mean?" "It means a ghost. Something that's there, but you can't see it." "Fitting." Caleb almost smiled. "Start the engines." The twin Rolls-Royce pearls came alive with a sound that Caleb felt in the base of his skull. Deep, powerful, alive. The aircraft trembled under the thrust, eager to move, eager to fly. They taxied to the runway. Caleb's eyes swept the instruments one final time. Everything was perfect. The aircraft was ready. Torres was ready. But was he ready? The question surfaced from the place he kept locked. The place where Jinx lived. The place where a 26-year-old kid with pictures of the space shuttle taped inside his helmet had burned and fallen and never come home. Caleb's hands tightened on the yoke. "Caleb," Torres said quietly, "you okay?" "I'm okay." "Your hands." Caleb looked down. His knuckles were white. He loosened his grip deliberately, finger by finger, and placed his hands flat on his thighs for 2 seconds. Then he picked up the yoke again. Steady this time. Meridian Tower, Wraith 1, ready for departure, runway 27. Wraith 1, winds 230 at 10, cleared for takeoff, runway 27. Good luck up there. Cleared for takeoff, Wraith 1. He pushed the throttles forward. The engines roared. The aircraft surged. Torres called the speeds. 80 knots. Check. V1. V1. Rotate. Caleb pulled back, and the Bombardier lifted off the runway with the same grace it had shown the first time. But this time, Caleb didn't level off. He pulled the nose up into a steep climb, the kind of departure angle that civilian pilots never attempted. The kind that required absolute trust in the aircraft and absolute mastery of its limits. Torres pressed back into his seat. That's a pretty aggressive climb. It's a tactical departure. Standard military procedure for hostile environments. We're in Virginia. The Pentagon people don't know the difference. They just know it looks impressive. At 5,000 feet, Caleb leveled off and banked hard to the left, bringing the aircraft around in a tight, sweeping turn that kept the wings visible from the observation area below. He flew 3 precise patterns, each one designed to showcase the aircraft's maneuverability, speed, and stability. Then he did something that made Torres grip his armrest. "I'm going to demonstrate a high-speed pass," Caleb said. "How high speed?" "Red line." "Caleb." "Trust me." Caleb pushed the throttles to maximum and pointed the nose at the runway. The aircraft accelerated through 400 knots, 450, 480. The airframe shuddered at the edges of its envelope, every rivet and panel vibrating with the force of near supersonic speed. Torres watched the airspeed indicator climb and stopped breathing. Caleb held the pass for exactly 8 seconds, streaking over the runway at 500 feet, the roar of the engines rattling the windows of the observation area below. Then he pulled back hard, sending the aircraft into a steep climb that pinned them both into their seats. At 12,000 feet, he leveled off and let the speed bleed away. "Torres, breathe." Torres exhaled explosively. "That was insane." "That was Tuesday in the Mojave." "We're not in the Mojave." "No, but the people watching just saw what this aircraft can do in the hands of someone who knows how to push it. And that's what sells a contract." Caleb brought the aircraft around for the approach. He configured the flaps, ran the descent checklist, and lined up on the runway with the precision of a laser. "Caleb," Torres said as they descended through 1,000 feet. "What?" "I just want to say something." "Make it fast. We're about to land." "A week ago, I was terrified of this airplane. I didn't think I belonged in this seat. And today, sitting next to you, I feel like maybe I do." Caleb glanced at Torres for half a second. "You do belong in this seat.
He just needed someone to show you. 500 feet, Torres called. Gear down. 3 green. 300. Stable approach. On speed. 100. 50. 30. 20. 10. The wheels kissed the runway so gently that Torres almost missed it. No bounce, no float, just the softest contact imaginable, followed by the smooth deceleration of the thrust reversers and the quiet confidence of a perfect landing. Torres shook his head.
How do you do that? Practice, about 10,000 of them. They taxied back to the ramp. Through the cockpit windows, Caleb could see the observation area. The 4 Pentagon officials were standing. Victoria was standing. Nobody was sitting. That was a good sign. Caleb shut down the engines, completed the post-flight checklist, and stood up from the left seat. His legs were solid. His hands were steady. His heart was calm. But inside, in the place where Jinx lived, something had shifted. Not gone, never gone, but lighter. Like a weight that had been sitting on his chest for a decade, had lifted just enough for him to breathe fully. He walked down the air stairs and onto the ramp. Victoria was already heading toward him, walking fast, her heels clicking like they always did. But this time, her face was different. No calculation, no scrutiny. Just something raw and open that looked a lot like awe. Behind her, the lead Pentagon official, a silver-haired man in a charcoal suit, was talking into his phone with an expression of barely contained excitement. Victoria reached Caleb first. She stopped 3 feet away and looked at him like she was seeing him for the first time. "That was the most extraordinary piece of flying I've ever witnessed," she said. "It was a demonstration. That's all. General Morrison just called his office. He's recommending full contract approval. $412 million. 5-year term." Caleb nodded. "Good." "Good? That's all you have to say?" "What do you want me to say?" "I don't know. Maybe celebrate? Maybe acknowledge that you just saved this company?" "I flew an airplane, Ms. Hale. Your team prepped it. Your mechanics maintained it. Torres was in the right seat calling every checklist item. This wasn't one person. This was everybody." Victoria stared at him. Then she did something that Caleb had never seen her do, and that, based on the reactions of everyone watching, nobody else had ever seen her do either. She extended her hand and said, "Thank you. I mean that." Caleb shook her hand. "You're welcome. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a meeting with Garrett at noon about his global upgrade training." He walked past her, past the Pentagon officials who tried to stop him for a handshake, past Frank, who was standing by the hangar door with tears in his eyes that he would deny for the rest of his life, and past Danny, the fueler, who started clapping and couldn't stop. Caleb waved them off and kept walking. There was one more thing he needed to do. He went to his office, sat down at his desk, and opened the bottom drawer. Inside was the worn photograph, the one he'd carried in his chest pocket for 11 years. 2 men in flight suits, standing in front of an experimental jet, grinning like the world couldn't touch them. Caleb held it in his hands. "I flew today, Jinx," he said quietly, "and it didn't break me." He looked at the young face in the photograph, the cocky grin, the patch on the shoulder, the dream in those eyes that never got the chance to come true. "I'm going to keep flying, not because I forgot about you, because I remember. Every day, brother, every single day." He set the photograph on his desk, face up, right next to the picture of Owen. Then he opened his laptop and got to work on Garrett's training plan. 3 hours later, at 3:25, Caleb locked his office and drove home. He parked on the street, walked to the bus stop, and waited.
The yellow bus appeared around the corner at 3:31. It stopped. The doors opened. Owen came down the steps with his backpack bouncing and a piece of paper clutched in his hand. "Dad! Dad, look!" He held up the paper. It was a drawing. A jet flying high above a city, with two people visible in the cockpit windows.
Underneath, in Owen's careful handwriting, it said, "My dad, the pilot." Caleb took the drawing and looked at it for a long time. "When did you make this?" "Today, in art class. Ms. Rivera said we should draw our heroes." "Your hero?" "Yeah, who else would it be?" Caleb's throat closed. He knelt down and pulled Owen into a hug so tight that Owen squeaked. "Dad, you're squishing me." Sorry, buddy." He loosened his grip, but didn't let go completely. "This is the best drawing I've ever seen." "Really?" "Really. We're going to frame this one." They walked home together, Owen talking a mile a minute about his day, about the drawing, about a kid named Jackson who said pilots weren't as cool as astronauts, and how Owen told him that pilots were cooler because they fly every day, not just once. Caleb listened to every word, every single word, because these were the moments. Not the takeoffs or the landings or the $400 million contracts. These moments. A boy and his father walking home in the afternoon sun, talking about nothing and everything at the same time. That night, after dinner, after homework, after they tested 2 new paper airplane designs in the hallway, Caleb sat Owen down at the kitchen table. "I want to show you something." He pulled out the photograph, the one from his desk, the one he'd carried for 11 years. Owen took it carefully, the way he handled everything Caleb gave him, like it was precious. "Is that you?" Owen pointed at the taller figure on the left. "That's me, about 15 years ago. You look young." "I was young." "Who's the other guy?" "That's Marcus, Jinx, the friend I told you about." Owen studied the photograph with serious eyes. "He looks happy." He was. He was always happy, even when things were hard. "Dad?" "Yeah? Do you think he'd be proud of you? For flying again?" The question hit Caleb in the center of his chest, not like a blow, like a key turning in a lock. "Yeah," Caleb said, and his voice broke just slightly on the word. "Yeah, I think he would." "I'm proud of you too." Caleb reached across the table and put his hand on Owen's head. "That means more to me than anything anyone has ever said." Owen grinned. That grin. The one that was worth every sacrifice, every silent year, every morning spent under a jet when he should have been above the clouds. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Anything." "Can I come to the airport with you sometime? Like, for real? Not just away from the bus?" Caleb thought about it. He thought about Victoria's reaction, about regulations, about all the reasons a responsible adult should say no. "Saturday," Caleb said. "I'll take you Saturday. I'll show you everything." Owen's face exploded with joy. "Everything? The cockpit?" "The cockpit, the engines, the whole thing." "Can I sit in the pilot's seat?" "You can sit in the pilot's seat." "Can I touch the buttons?" "Some of them." "Which ones?" "The ones that don't make the plane move." Owen laughed. A pure, bright, uncontainable laugh that filled the small apartment and made the walls feel wider and the ceiling feel higher. Saturday morning, Caleb drove to Meridian with Owen in the passenger seat. The boy was wearing a polo shirt he'd picked out himself and a pair of sneakers he'd cleaned with a wet paper towel. His hair was combed. His eyes were enormous. They walked through the hangar together. Caleb introduced Owen to Carl, to Danny, to Frank, to every mechanic and fueler who crossed their path. Each one shook Owen's hand like he was a visiting dignitary. Then Caleb led him to the Bombardier. Owen stopped at the bottom of the air stairs and looked up at the aircraft. His mouth was open. His eyes reflected the white fuselage like mirrors.
Dad, it's huge. $65 million worth of huge. Can we go inside?
That's why we're here. They climbed the stairs together.
Caleb showed Owen the cabin first, letting him run his hands over the leather seats and press his face against the windows. Then he led him forward, through the cockpit door, into the space where everything had changed.
Sit down, Caleb said, pointing to the left seat.
Owen climbed into the captain's chair. His feet didn't reach the rudder pedals. His head barely cleared the top of the seat. But when his small hands found the yoke, his face transformed into something Caleb would remember for the rest of his life. Wonder. Pure, unfiltered, bottomless wonder. "Dad," Owen whispered, "this is where you sit?"
This is where I sit.
"And you fly this? You actually fly this?"
Every chance I get.
Owen looked out through the cockpit windows, at the runway stretching into the distance, at the sky beyond it, at the world that opened up when you had the courage to leave the ground. "I'm going to fly one of these someday," Owen said. Not a question, not a wish, a statement.
"I know you will," Caleb said. "Will you teach me?" "Every step of the way, just like I promised." Owen turned the yoke slightly, feeling its resistance, imagining the wings responding, imagining the nose lifting, imagining the moment when the wheels leave the earth and everything below gets smaller and the whole sky becomes yours. Caleb stood behind him and placed his hand on Owen's shoulder. Through the cockpit windows, the morning sun was rising, painting the runway in gold, lighting up the taxiways like a path drawn just for them. Victoria was watching from the terminal window. She saw the man in the cockpit and the boy in the captain's seat, and she understood, finally and completely, what Caleb had been trying to tell her from the beginning. That worth isn't measured in titles or paychecks or the size of the office. It's measured in the choices you make when nobody is watching, in the sacrifices you carry without complaint, in the quiet courage of a man who gave up everything he loved so he could be everything his son needed. And now, standing in the cockpit with his boy, Caleb Reed had both, the sky and his son, the past and the future, the ghost of a friend who never stopped believing in him, and a child who never stopped looking up to him. He didn't need permission to fly anymore. He didn't need forgiveness. He didn't need a uniform or a rank or a call sign to prove who he was. He was a mechanic who could touch the edge of space, a father who came home every night, a man who carried his grief not as a chain, but as a compass, pointing him toward the things that mattered most. Caleb Reed was no longer hiding. He was no longer the ghost. He was the man his son drew in art class, the man his crew trusted, the man who stood up when no one else would and flew when everyone said he couldn't. And the sky, after 10 long years of waiting, was glad to have him back.